Hi, so I'm here with Carrie Jost again, our dear Creative Kinesiology founder, and we are developing this series called CK Chatting, and we're going to talk a bit more about one of the key pieces of work that we work with in Creative Kinesiology, which is working with the ancestral lines to bring healing and ease into those that are currently living and their future generations. So welcome, Carrie. So we're going to be looking a bit more at your book as well when we're doing this. Yes. So let's talk about ancestry. Let's talk about how Creative Kinesiology works with the ancestral lines.
Well, I thought I'd read a little bit from the book and then talk about a client of many years ago now, but one that really made me realize how creative kinesiology, when working with ancestral energy, can make huge, profound impact on somebody. And it really is huge, it can be life-changing. And we started this work in the 1980s, beginning of the 1990s, when at that time other people didn't realize that ancestral stuff could have such an impact on our health and well-being. So I'll just read this little bit from the book. From the early days of working with people, I've been fascinated by the beginnings of their disease, in the sense of being ill, in pain, discomfort, feeling alone and unloved, and any other kind of lack of ease that you can think of. Now, if the dis-ease originates with the ancestors, using our muscle testing tool, we can find out what is going on. The problem will be held somewhere in the body, in energy flows, emotional makeup, or in the mind, or even in the spirit. How often do problems show up as a dullness, a lack of get up and go, or a feeling of there being no purpose in life? Often, in my experience, the light is not there in the person's eyes. Their being is droopy and slumped, or tight and defended, with a voice that is a monotone or dreary, or fast and overexcited. Could this be a sign that a person is carrying a burden from the past, a burden that may not even be theirs? It's usually the case that the client will have no idea that their problem is an ancestral one. They will assume it's theirs alone. So this I think is really important, because one of the ways that we can see how somebody is to see if their eyes are alight, if their faces are alight, are they animated, are they present in this time and space? And if they're not, it's a sign that something's going on. And quite often it seems to be that it's an ancestral problem. So I'll just give you a story about a little boy who was a few months old. He came with his mum and dad to see me, referred by a friend. And when they came, they told me the heartbreaking story of how little Larry, not his real name, how little Larry had been keeping them awake all day and all night, screaming and screaming because he was covered in eczema from head to toe. And they had to hold him, walk around with him, rock him in his pram. And it was just a full-time job, and very upsetting for the parents, of course. So they came hoping that I'd be able to help in some way. So what I did was ask if it was appropriate to work on this little boy by surrogating through the mum. It's impossible to muscle test a few-month-old baby. So the mother took on the baby's energy. She held him while I used one of her arms to muscle test, getting a yes and a no response. And in surrogacy, her body said it was fine and appropriate to work on this problem. So what we did, we found it was an ancestral problem, and the problem went back through the generations And I can't now remember how many generations it was, but it was certainly more than 2 or 3, probably more than 7, because quite often these deep entrenched problems they go back a long way. And so the problem was found to be in the liver meridian. When I checked the element, it was the wood element, the liver meridian, and the ancestral issue was a reversed meridian. So the liver meridian was actually working upside down. So instead of coming from the foot all the way up through the legs to the lower ribs, it was going from the lower ribs down to the feet, which meant that the whole energy flow in the body was disrupted by one meridian not flowing in the right direction. So what we did, Mum then handed the baby over to Dad, and I worked with her with her meridians and massaged the length of the meridian from toe to lower ribs on both sides, with the intent of bringing the energy up in the right direction. Then the following meridian is the lung. Liver leads into lung, which begins here on the shoulders and comes down to the thumbs. So we did those 2 meridians a few times. And at the end of that, the muscle testing said that we had cleared the ancestral problem. Now, I don't know more about what the ancestral problem was, except that there was some deep-rooted anger and fear in the body, but we had cleared it by the end of doing this. And then they went, and I had fingers crossed, prayers for the little boy and the mum and dad, and really wishing them the best because they were having such a difficult time. Well, I didn't hear back from them. I thought they might come for another session, but they didn't. But a few months later, I heard from the friend who'd referred them that actually it was like a miracle. This little boy was no longer screaming, and the eczema had cleared up within 2 or 3 weeks. It was an amazing story. And apparently the dad still mentions it to people. And this was about 20 years ago, something like that, quite a long time ago. So this, I think, demonstrates how important the ancestral work is. Now, if we hadn't discovered that, I just wonder what would have happened to that little boy. So yeah, that's my example at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Carrie. So one of the things that always fascinated me about the way that we work with the ancestral ways is that we don't just work with blood ancestry. Can you speak to that a little bit in terms of the fact that we're influenced not just by blood but by spirit?
Absolutely. Yes, because this comes up with people fairly often when they have, particularly when they have an intractable problem that really doesn't seem to move or shift, even though they work on it, they have healing on it. And so we can check if the ancestral problem is a blood ancestry problem, which is mum and dad and the ancestors beyond, or whether it's a spiritual ancestry problem, which means it goes into the spiritual family line of some kind, which for some people would be looking at the past life line of the person, but certainly something that comes beyond the physical. So in our spiritual soul life. And I believe we do have a spiritual and soul life, which is beyond the body. And the examples of that are amazing. Because just the other day I was working with someone who had a problem. They'd had a very difficult emotional time. And so the emotional body was all over the place. That's the body in the aura at about this kind of level. Some of the energy centers were out of balance and also meridians. So quite a lot going on. And when we tracked back to where this had come from, it came from spiritual ancestry and came from persecution from way back in time, when this person had been persecuted for their beliefs, this person was a healer, so been persecuted for their beliefs, tortured, imprisoned, and eventually killed. And this had left an imprint, a kind of spiritual imprint on their being. And so what we did was balance the person for that particular problem from what had happened before, balancing the meridians, energy centers, and some work on the body as well, energy work, to get the energy flowing again. And it made such a difference. This person who'd come in looking just dreadful, had light in her eyes, beaming face, uplifted, posture changed. It was fantastic. So that's the kind of work that we can do. And it's not uncommon to find that healers have experienced persecution in some way or other, whether through the collective, through their own experience, through their spiritual ancestry.
I think that's really interesting, because there's a lot said about, you know, if you've got bad back swelling in your family, then that's what you're going to get. And we know from epigenetics that that's actually no longer true. In fact, it's a bit of a cop-out, really, that actually we can change our blood ancestry, but also the spiritual ancestry seems to be that couple of extra steps back. And if we can harness that as well, then balance is much more possible. Ease, I think, is the word that seems to be the word of the day. So, Carrie, you had another chapter, part of a chapter you wanted to read, I think.
Well, I thought I did. I'm not sure I do.
Okay.
I think the
have we talked about it?
I think the thing to really know about what we've inherited from ancestors, whether it's physical or ancestral, is that we can end up living a belief system which may not be ours. And this has come through various scientific biological studies of people, that we can end up with epigenetic add-ons to our DNA and into that whole DNA system. And if we're living a belief that isn't ours, it may well have come from our ancestors or from our spiritual ancestry. And we've kind of incorporated it. But the really positive thing about this is that if we can identify it, the body knows it's been witnessed. And witnessing is really important, because the body says, somebody spotted that, the fact that I've got this belief hanging about. And the environment that we live in, we can change, because it's the environmental factors that can kick in at any point can mean that we're living a DNA experience that may not be relevant for now. It simply comes from our ancestors, blood ancestry or spiritual ancestry. And we can look at where the belief is hanging out in the system. We can then look at what it is, and we can change it. And the person doing the work can actually, if I'm doing the work, the person I'm working with can then think, but I don't really go along with this belief that I'm useless in life. That's not true. And they can change it so that actually they're saying, I'm useful, I'm good at what I do, I'm successful, I reach my goals. And these kind of affirmations, when we work with them in the place where the belief has got entrenched, can change the belief and change the way that the ancestry is working within the body.
As you've just been speaking about that, I remember a fairly big, I think it was on a workshop that you were running and I was partaking in around this work. And I remember I have a grandmother who's currently still alive. And one of her phrases to me was always, "You don't get too big for your boots." And I remember, and I'm going, "I don't want to get too big for my boots. I don't want to get too big for my boots." And you going, "Oh, for goodness sake. Like, if you get too big for your boots, you'll just fall over. It shouldn't stop you from making the changes." And I really remember it, because it's like, where does that phrase even come from? It's not mine. It's not how I want to live my life. It's not how I want to believe. I want to be as big as I can be, as present as I can be, as strong as I can be. It's not about anybody else. It's just about me being me. But it was a real mantra that was running through my whole system, that I know for a fact she's inherited from previous generations of, keep yourself small, don't rock the boat, don't push the tide, be seen and not heard, all of that kind of stuff. And I remember it being revelation. Praise. I don't want to get too big for my boots.
Well, it's interesting as well, because what I've discovered is that quite often we hang on to these things, and our large intestine, the colon, hangs on to them. And so do the bacteria, the microbiota that live in the large intestine.
Mm-hmm.
We have at least 2 kilos of microbiota living in our guts. And each one of them, these trillions of little cells, the bacteria that keep us going, has DNA. And those DNA can hang on to beliefs as well. So, I can remember changing one of mine, which was came from my mum after the war, which is life is very uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen. We have to be very careful. And when I discovered that, I changed it, and all of a sudden, life opened up a bit more. It's great. It's finding these things is like a revelation, really.
Yeah, it is. Great. And it brings back the power to the person in the now. And that's where change can happen. So thank you, Carrie. That's wonderful. We're going to have loads more of these, I think. So just a reminder that Carrie's book, The Way of the Tracker, which is right here, beautiful book, is full of these insights, and Carrie's over 30 years clinical experience and fields of knowledge garnered from lots and lots of reading and working with this way in practical terms. And you can get this book from the Creative Kinesiology School website, which you will find at creativekinesiology.org. So until next time, thank you.
Thank you.